Welcome to Track to Mix. In this mix workshop, Paul J. Falcone, Psaroudakis, Matthew Sin, and Jeff Lanier offer their expert mixing advice. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
Okay, so I might as well just jump right into it here. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Paul Falcone. I've been a freelance recording and mixing engineer for about over 25 years at this point. I mixed my first record in the box back in, when I say in the box, I mean on a computer. Came up through console style mixing, mixed my first major single in the box in 1999, mixed my first song in a small production that was a major single back in 2005. So I've been working on a computer for a very long time. Like I said, I did come up through console mixing, but I quickly preferred to mix on a computer and, use analog gear for tracking. Necessary. I just found I got so much more control mixing on a computer. Certainly today with, model plugins and emulations, we can get that same analog quality, in my opinion, while mixing on a computer. But that's just more recently I've been working on live events, and also started working in television in the last year, which has been quite challenging. Live TV, and it can be pretty intense. I'm really enjoying it. So that's my story. Let's turn it over to Alex.
Hey guys, nice to connect tonight. So I'm Alex Psaroudakis, mastering engineer for 22 years now. And before that, I was a recording engineer. I was a simile producer. This kind of thing that you try to do in the music industry. And so that's what I do. I master music.
He's like, Matt, are you here? I see you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Matt.
So I should also mention, I'm coming from New York. Alex, you're also in New York, correct?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Matt, you're in?
I'm in Hong Kong.
Matt is coming to us from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. You're literally on the other side of the world. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I was in New York for around 6 years, and I was working at Germano Studios as a staff engineer, and I was freelance mixing for around 8-9 years, producing, mixing, recording, and now I moved back to Hong Kong. And then before I started working as an engineer, I was studying in Berklee College of Music, and I was majoring in this music production engineering. So nice to meet you guys today.
Thank you, Matt. Jeff, you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear.
Awesome. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself before we jump into Dasan's track?
Sure. So I'm the label manager for Chesky Records, which is an audiophile label based in New York. Does jazz, classical, singer-songwriter. It's minimally recorded, so sometimes as few as one microphone. We also do binaural recordings, which are essentially, it's a microphone that's literally put into the heads of what looks like a crash test dummy, so that it captures the sound of the room in 360. From a mixing standpoint, what that means is you have to do your mix prior to recording rather than after the fact. Because if you want someone panned to the left, they have to get up, physically move to the left. There's none of the editing. It's going straight to 2-track. So, but obviously I have experience doing the full breadth of mixing as well. But Chesky tends to be minimally mic'd, not a whole lot of extra stuff.
Right on. Great. So here we go. We're going to be listening to 3 tracks tonight. We're going to start with Dasan's track. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your track?
Okay, cool. Yeah, my name is Dasan. Currently reside in the Bronx. Basically, this is a track I've been working on for a little bit during the quarantine. Just kind of like put everything together. I made the beat and then I did the rhymes as well. And then, I mixed it like a bunch of times, and I just kind of, the thing about it is like I wish it had more power on the low end. And then just wanted to see like pairs to listen, see anything I might have missed, because like once you start mixing things, I feel like a certain amount of times you just can't even like hear it anymore. I kind of reached that point where it was just like, all right, I've done too much with this track, so I just wanted to get some other ears on it, and see, what else we can maybe do with it.
Cool.
Experimental, a lot of different shifts. So it's like a surprising track. So just be ready for that.
Right on. On the screen is going to be a Lux meter, and it's going to be the Waves analyzer. So you can see the spectral content, the harmonic content, and the phase correlation or the stereo imaging. Okay, so here is Reanimation.
Reanimation in the pavement, flagrant, really I'm impatient, pacing on different formulations, money through the door, that's getting lost, but as fast as I can take it, politicians mutating, now seeing confirmations, keep me with the obese niggas on the street, the police is a police, none on my feet, low key, like the been screen, the machine is around me, got a couple 16s that are around me, no piece of disease sitting on me, still watching the street roll on, we wrong step and it's bleeding on me, look at that now. Starting to crown, turn it down, so static in the sounds. Getting played, placation, I'm saying. Pressing luck in the mayhem. Making sense, time to catch on our way in. On the fence, I know what's on its way in. Magic, we on me the same man. Niggas don't know I don't get it. Brother balls till it's finished. Skip the line and cut the ribbon. Sticking signs in the cross lines. Minds turning like the exorcist. I'm pulling up on some extra shit. On my way up, breathing existence. Selfish and legend it. Roll them off in the coffin. It's better looking like they lost it. Niggas don't know I'm involved in. Turn them out to the soft ends. Moving urban with soft serve. Live blurred in the crosswords. It's absurd to fall for it.
Right on, man. Great job. I think that sounds pretty good.
Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Okay, let's hear it, Alex.
So I think the track is really solid. Low end is very good, and there's two things that I see that could maybe be slightly upgraded. It's the space in between elements, like the space, meaning some pan and some use of different reverb and delays and effects to place elements on the field. Like right now, the track is a little narrow center, and there's a few pads that all of a sudden open up a lot. But I think it's like missing a little bit of work space-wise. So using delays, using reverb, using pan, simple pan already makes a huge difference, and very carefully using those, stereolyzer, so to speak. And there's so many plugins out there that do that. It's very dangerous because it goes out of phase very fast. But sometimes, on sound that doesn't have that much low end, you can get away with a little out of phase. Not being out of phase, but just like slightly more open up. And then I would say the track is like really maximized. It's intersample clipping at +2 dB. And, for a mix, you don't really need that because, let's say, you would upload that, on Spotify. Spotify would drop it by 2 dB because of the clipping. So sometimes it's just better to let the music breathe a little more. It's not a big deal, but, if you reduce maybe the limiter on it or the compressor that you have on the bus master, you would get maybe more snap and certainly more punch on all of those low ends, those kicks and stuff. But otherwise, it sounds really good here.
And
Thank you. I appreciate.
I was going to echo the comment about the panning, with the exception of, I'm sure you're probably thinking of in the club, you want to have it be primarily left and right, but in our listening environment right now, I feel like you could have used the space a little bit more, like especially when those 30 seconds start kicking in, then maybe if you can do some panning there that make that really sort of an accent point. Otherwise, it's straight pans left and right the entire time. But I think as far as everything else, it's sort of everything's in its right space pretty well.
Matt, yeah.
Yep. I listened to it beforehand as well, and I wrote some notes. And I agree with everything like everybody was saying before. Definitely some panning or widening helps, like open up like the space in the middle for the kick and the bass especially, and the vocals. But I have a few other notes that I would like to add to that. So like, I think the hi-hat is a little bit too bright and too loud compared to like the kick and the bass. I think it's like mostly if you want the kick and the bass hit harder, it's mostly gain staging. So right now, I think you can leave more headroom for the kick and the bass, and tame the high end a little bit more, so you can have some headroom like for the kick, for the low end, especially for the massive low end. The production was top notch. It's just like some gain staging, balancing. I think it helps a lot, and of course the panning. And what else? The vocal I think can shine a little bit more, like brighter slightly bit, so you can hear the vocals slightly bit better and see it better and cut through the mix better. And you can shift the vocal brighter and high in frequency, then you can have more space in the low end for the kick and the bass. Then it will hit harder in the club. So I love the creative panning. Like I think you should do more like auto panning on the hi-hat and stuff like that. And yeah, some reverb definitely helps to put like, okay, how front the vocal is and how back the synth, the pad is. That kind of give you that space, front to back space. So that really helps also opening some space for everything else, because the kick and the bass is really dry. It's up front in your face and the vocals in your face. Everything else could maybe go back a little bit just to give that separation. And one last thing, I think you can sidechain the pads with the low end and also with the bass to the kick drum. So when the kick drum hits, so for this style, like when the kick drum hits, you want to sidechain everything else. So make the kick drum larger than life, basically. So then your low end will be much cleaner. And you can, design like how much low end you want to have in the pad and how much low end you want to have in the bass. Because when the bass comes in, the pad kind of feel overpowering. So the pad was kind of covering the bass up a little bit as well. So you might want to deal with that. Also, maybe like use some mid-side EQing to get rid of the low end in the middle for the bass, to leave some room for the bass. But for the side, you can keep the bass, the low end in the synth, so to speak. So,
all right,
that's some of my first ideas when I listen to a track, because pretty much everything is there.
Yeah, I think it sounds great. I kind of echo a little bit of the panning. And I agree with what Jeff was saying with the, you do kind of want to keep it mono for the club. However, could certainly make it, more stereo or more aggressive panning to make it a more, kind of a cool sounding stereo record if you want to take it in that direction. So Alex, I wanted to ask you, when you talked about the stereoizers, do you mean something like a Waves S1 where it just increases stereo image, or more like a binaural type stereo imager where it's using micro delays that could potentially knock things slightly out of phase?
Basically, I just like to use the isotope imager, which is a micro delay, and you can really play with the delay itself and see with the mono button engage where you start canceling too much. And a lot of the club stuff are mono only on bass and kick. All the rest is fully open, and especially all of the small sounds that you can hear going, sometimes they just go in a loop. They pan like crazy, if you pay attention, but they're very small sounds, so you don't normally you don't notice it really. But a lot of the techno, a lot of the trance, the trance music, that's not trance, but trance music, you use those autopan all the time, to make people like little crazy, dizzy with the drugs and stuff. But on that one, I would leave the kick centered, because you don't want the kick out of phase. That's going to ruin the track in the club. And the bass, as Matt said, like maybe carve a little bit the middle and leave the side with slightly more low end. And those pads, the pads can be pan either with the micro delay, with the isotope things, or the S, or the there's another plugin.
Micro pre-shift.
S1 does something different. I feel. I'm not sure it's a micro delay. I tend to like much more, the isotope. I think it even though it does open a lot, it still stay, not out of phase that much. Playing with the amount of micro delay that you use, of course.
The other comment I really liked, Matt, when you were talking about sidechaining the pad with the kick, and you had said sidechain, a lot. Were you saying sidechain more of the track, or more of the elements with the kick?
Yeah, I would say sidechain at least the pad and the bass to the kick, because those are the main like sustaining elements in the production. The rest is like up to you, but I feel those two elements should really be sidechain because of the style of the music we're in. The sidechain is like part of the language. I think you should employ that skill set in this kind of music.
Got it. Yeah. I can't say I disagree. So the only other comment, and I wanted to know how you guys are feeling about this, was I maybe wanted to hear a bit more punch on the bass to sort of, make, when there were times where the bass was hitting and the kick wasn't, and I kind of wanted to hear the bass hitting a little bit harder like it was a kick. What do you think?
Not disagreeing to that, yeah.
Yep.
It's like a pluck kind of bass, so.
Exactly. Like make it, you can even, maybe do that with, compress it kind of hard with a slower attack time, or it could be just a key thing to bring out that particular, frequency band that's going to make it just, hit a little bit harder.
Yeah, you can also use like a distortion to it or expander. It kind of helps. But only when the kick wasn't hitting. That's why it's like side chaining the kick to the bass. So when the kick wasn't hitting, the bass could be the punchy element. So.
Right on. But I mean, man, that was really solid. I really enjoyed listening to that. It was definitely a treat. Thank you for submitting that, Dasan.
Oh, I was going to chime in with something, if you guys don't mind. One thing I was going to ask is, with all the panning and like stereo imaging feedback, how does that change with most of the listening being mobile these days, and most people listening on headphones where you don't have I guess true stereo, you have like some sort of pseudo stereo, and I find with my music that the panning through headphones it's not as apparent. So I'm just curious with you guys, the engineering, again, with everything being mobile these days, how does panning change for you guys?
I think that's a good question for Alex, being a mastering engineer. What do you think?
Funny enough, today I work on 28 tracks. Yesterday I work on 10, and I never use headphones. I never did. It's been 8 years. I'm not using headphones. My clients really do not care about headphones, although they're 90% of the listening, is going to happen on the phone and through headphones. They really don't seem to care about that headphone. Most of my client wants the track to be played on a stereo system to play well. And if it play well on headphones, it's going to be great. If it doesn't, I think it's going to be great too. And what I've noticed, the few times that I've heard, in headphones, I do hear the same panning on headphones. So I don't know if it's because of the headphones or it's because of the playback that I use to feed, the headphone with, but it's not like, you should treat music as it's going to be listened in the best stereo system possible. Because if it sounds good on the best stereo system possible, it will sound good on headphone, no matter what you do. That's my experience. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's,
No, I
got you. I trust your ear over mine, to be honest. And
it could be just, your source, not the headphone, but, what you use to play the music with and to feed the headphone. That's also possible.
Alex, I think you raise a great point of, people will often, sort of complain like, well, it's just going to be listened to on earbuds anyway. But really, when you're working at the top level, like you're working at, that they are a consideration, but it's not like we're making decisions based on the fact that it's going to be played on earbuds, that we're making decisions like it's going to be played on a high quality system. And if it sounds good on a high quality system, then of course it shall sound good on, lesser quality things like headphones and earbuds or, AirPods.
I feel like for that genre of music, I'd be more concerned with how it's going to sound in the venue. Well, maybe not right now, but generally speaking, making sure that it sounds good in the club, like it sounds good listening at home as well, as opposed to just not panning it for headphones. Because you don't want to if you're at a club and something's panned to the left and you're standing on the right side of the venue, you don't hear it at all. But there's ways that you can pan stuff still creatively that make it interesting for both formats, whether you're at the show or at home.
And I mean, the venue, but also the car. You want that thing to like blow you away. Someone's got a system in their car, which is a similar perception as what it's going to sound like in a venue, like super powerful and loud. Were you going to say something, Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to chip in a little bit. So from a mixing standpoint, I use headphone a lot. So I found it very consistent, but like headphone and earbuds have wider stereo field than speaker, so to speak. So your mid thing, like vocal, bass, and everything seems to be lower, wider than on speaker, like a stereo system, because everything is wider panning. Because it go behind your ear a little bit, like go like 180 degrees. So your pan left and right stuff would be like really wide on headphone, but that's part of the thing with headphone and earbuds. And also low end would be massive because you're on the headphone. On your speaker, because you might not hear as much low end as on headphone. And you think, okay, everything is louder, everything is like wider, but on headphone with the low end, everything is covered with the bass and low end. But the headphone and earbuds also simulating what's happening in the car with more bass. And the speaker is like placed randomly in a way. So I always check in headphones and earbuds, make sure it translate. Because if you translate headphone earbuds, also translate to stereo system. And also it works for like really good sounding stereo system as well, like a club and everything. So I check everything and try to take a balance, but you got to know how your headphones sound. So references helps, how much low end your headphone have, and how wide your stereo field in headphone is different than on speaker. So got to take that into consideration.
I definitely identify with the Matt. I would say, when mixing a record, headphones are just another set of reference monitors. That the same way we might listen on, 2 or 3 pairs of speakers, then you're also going to listen on headphones, like the same way you might also listen on, like an iPhone dock or any type of consumer setup that we are listening to. It's going to sound like on those other types of setups.
I have a question for Matt real quick, because he was just going over the headphones and everything. Do you prefer to use like closed back or open headphones when you're mixing and recording? Do you find it like one a little bit easier than the other, or one gives you a little bit more of a dynamic than the other?
I always prefer open back.
Open, cool.
Yeah, because but for recording you can't use open back, so you have to use closed back because of lead and everything. But everything else I use open back because the mid range I found is more natural than closed back. Because closed back headphone, I tried a lot of pairs and I still couldn't find one pair that I like. Most of them is like mid scooped. So you got tons of bass and tons of high end, but not a lot of mid range.
Yeah.
For like production and mixing, I like to have more mid range for clarity when you're doing like critical like decisions.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Like the nice mid range and the low end is important for me. So those are the quality I'm looking for. And open back headphone give me that, and also less fatiguing. If you use a closed back for a long time, it's tiring. But if you use open back, it feels like you're using speaker. So that's why I picked open back.
Cool. Thank you.
Sweet. What a great conversation. We hit a lot of really cool topics. So this is Kevin's track. This is called Ambient Chords. You want to tell us a bit about the track?
Yeah, sure. It's a deep house track. It's my artist name is I'm going to go by Simulation Universe, so it's probably going to be my first release. But I put it up on SoundCloud the other day, and I thought it sounded good. But when when SoundCloud auto played the next song, it really hit me a lot, uncomfortably loud. And so I realized my mix was too low, but when I was mixing or creating, I was worried about compressing the dynamic range too much. So yeah, I basically have an issue now where it's not loud enough, but I'm worried if I make it louder and compress it, that'll become too squashed. So interested in your guys' feedback on how to strike that balance and, what to look for, especially when it relates to the new, metrics that streaming is using and whatnot for loudness.
Sweet. Okay, so here we go. Here's Kevin's track, Ambient Chords. All right. Right. Alex.
Yes.
Yes. So you guys obviously just listened to that. You guys heard it. And Kevin, you had said that when you uploaded that to SoundCloud, the next track played against it. The next track was significantly louder.
Yeah, and that's I guess one thing I was thinking of that I hadn't mentioned is I know like these streaming services have their algorithms that will correct, but for something like SoundCloud, I'm not sure it has one in place to correct. So, doing it manually is still, I guess, important to us beginners who are maybe releasing stuff just on SoundCloud.
SoundCloud doesn't.
What was that? The sound?
Yeah.
SoundCloud does not. You can upload it any loudness, and SoundCloud it's just going to play as it is.
See, I mean, for just in general, to me, I felt like that track could use a limiter just to bring out sort of the, what a limiter does to a track. It definitely was reading pretty low when it first started, and generally speaking, I mean, it did start to hit around like minus 13, minus 12 at some point, but it was reading lower than that throughout most of the track. Let's see, who wants to start? I want to throw. Yeah, I want to throw it to Alex. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say.
So, first of all, that's a really cool track. I used to do a lot of deep house back in the days. I still do from time to time. So I think the reason why it plays so low, it's the amount of bass on the drop. I don't know which system you have at home, but here I have two 13.5 subs with two 12-inch, system. So it's like a club. I can hear exactly like they're gonna hear it on the club. And there's I feel you might not hear the bass that good.
Yeah, I do have trouble monitoring the bass.
Yeah, and it's like really, you can use like a spectral analyzer, isotope as one. The clarity from TC Electronic is a pretty good one, and you're gonna see all of those bass notes much higher than the kick drum. And for some genre that's gonna be okay, but for that one, the deep house, the bass must be there, must be solid, must be at the base of the song, but it can be overwhelming, the kick drum, because you sort of lose the groove instantly. And there's probably two frequency like around 70, 80, and 50 hertz that are extremely strong, and that makes the entire track being much lower, because if you put a limiter on that's going to start limiting everything, when those bass notes kick in, and everything, the kick, is going to go down, the snare is going to go down, and this is not what you want. So I feel just with a very simple, leveling of the bass, Matt can tell you how to do it specifically, if using compressors or using EQ or just using the volume on the console. I would use the console volume first of all to see where the track goes, but then definitively the first bass that come after that very long intro, it's a bit too loud, but the one in the drop, on the main drop, that one is way, 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 way too loud, like probably 3, 4, 5 dB too loud. So only by lowering that, you would gain probably 3, 4 dB on the track without using any limiter. And as Paul said, I would put a limiter anyway on it, once I've done that, and then you would bring maybe 6 dB up, 5, 6.
So just to recap, make sure I'm getting what you're saying is limit the bass, then you can bring everything else up, and it will. You'll get the loudness that way.
The bass in deep house, it's always very long notes. You have those pads too that are very long notes, and this is going against dynamic. The the longer notes of bass you have, and the less the rest of the element can breathe. So you want to always make sure that those bass notes, those very long bass notes, are not louder than the kick, because you're just killing the dynamic there. And Spotify, just to do like a small insert on Spotify, likes breathing, punchy stuff more than sustain long bass. So I would definitively watch that. I wouldn't reduce the length of the notes. They're great, the song is great. I would just lower the bass, and then Matt can extrapolate on how to control it a little bit more. That's what I would do. And then put, the limiter after.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate your guys' feedback, by the way. Take some notes here.
All right, Matt, that was quite the introduction.
Okay, I'll jump in for the low end. So, no, I heard the track, and my first reaction was the same thing. I think that the bass and the pad and the kick drum has too much sub-low. Like anything below 50 down there, it's just too much. So it kind of take up a lot of space and levels. So you don't hear anything up there, like in the mid-range and the high frequency. So it also bring down the whole track in volume, because there's a lot of low end that you don't hear on your system, but it's there. So it's taking up all the headroom. So if I were you, I would start mixing. Like when I start mixing, I always have a limiter on at some point. Once I dialed in my kick and bass level, I have my limiter on already, just so I know how my mix gonna sound like in loudness. Because you don't want to send a really quiet mix to a client, so that's not possible. So you want to send a loud and punchy with low end mix. So in order to achieve a louder mix, is like proper gain staging helps. So you gotta have the enough amount of low end, but not too much overwhelming. So it goes along with like Alex's comments. So you gotta have like the kick drum has to be louder than the bass, because that's where the punch and the dynamics coming from. So you want to make sure the kick and the bass are sitting in the right balance. So I always have the kick louder than the bass. You can use sidechain or just basic leveling. So I have the bass always slightly be quieter than the bass. And then the bass would be tiny,
slightly lower
like
than the
this.
kick. Yeah,
and then the kick, when the kick comes in, it will kick or go through the bass, so you can feel it. You can hear the system. So it's punchier. So the limiter kicks in after the kick transient. So the limiter will limit the kick transient more than the bass. Because if your bass is louder than the kick, then when your limiter kicks in, it's going to cut anything when the bass kicks in. So you're squashing everything, you can hear everything. But if the limiter is acting on the kick drum, it's so quick, so you don't really hear the limiting going on. So it's more transparent that way, and your track can get louder.
Oh, so you're talking about a limiter on the stereo bus with all this?
Yeah.
Okay.
As if you're mastering it, because you want to hear how the limiter is reacting to your mix. So if you're gain staging properly, your limiter shouldn't be doing that much. Maybe 1, 2, 3 dB. And you can get your mix really loud, like the radio quality, like levels. So
I don't even think I had a limiter on the stereo bus, because I'm newer to mixing. It's something I just started doing. And we'll see. I'll have to learn how to bump into it, without being too aggressive.
Absolutely. Because I started without mixing without a limiter, and I learned my lesson. So always have that just to check how a limiter, after mastering whatever, would do to your mix, and you adjust from that. You mix to the limiter. But also in like different like instruments, I'll have proper like compressor and everything, just so I can control the peaks and the levels better going to the limiter, so the limiter doesn't have to do a lot of work. So it's like a few dB on the kick drum, a few dB on the bass, and a few dB on the instrumentals, and then the limiter probably only like on the master, the limiter only acts like a couple of dBs.
Okay.
So controlling a little bit on everything, and at the end in the two mix, you don't have to do a lot.
Cool.
And you can and then also another thing is the kick. I think the tone of the kick or the sample wasn't really great for this song. It's a lot of sub low, but not a lot of low mid punch. I'm talking about 100 hertz.
I think I low passed it because I tend kicks that have that click tends to irritate me. But I guess in a club or something, like you need that attack to.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not like a 3-4K click. It's not like a metal kind of click. I'm talking like 100 hertz, 200 hertz.
Yeah.
You need that for the kick drum to translate better on smaller system. Because right now your kick, the fundamental frequency of your kick is more like 50 hertz, 60 hertz.
Yeah.
There's a lot in the low end, but nothing in the low mid.
I got you.
So in smaller system, you don't hear it, or in earbuds or in headphone, like a phone speaker, you don't hear that.
Yeah.
So you might want to shift the frequency to like 100, 200.
Okay, I hear that.
You can either change the sample of the kick, or you can use some harmonic distortion to recreate some frequency and punch on those 100, 200 hertz for the kick drum. Mm-hmm. And then you can have more sub-low for the bass. So you have the kick drum higher than the bass in frequency. Then you can have better. Yeah, so instead of they're both like in 50 hertz right now.
Yeah, they're kind of fighting each other.
They will be punchier, and then you leave the sub bass in the bass like frequency.
Okay.
Then it will opens up a lot more space, and you have more levels on like compared to other tracks on SoundCloud.
Cool.
Just to expand a bit on what you're talking about, because I think people get, especially when they go to something like a recording school, it's often preached to them that they should not be mixing with a limiter, but it's been a technique for decades now to mix into the limiter. And Alex, I'm sure Alex can testify that, oftentimes we will take the limiter off before we send it to mastering, but the limiter clamping down on those transients is absolutely a sound, and it's a sound that we're all used to.
Do you mind me, guys, or do you mind me asking you guys, when you set a limiter, where do you put that, like, maximum, and just roughly how much dB? You said a few dB of gain reduction at the most?
Yeah, like I'm not a mastering engineer, so Alex can chip in better on the maximum, like the maximum levels. I usually set minus 0.3 dB, just so there's like, it's not like 0 dBFS.
Yeah, because
if you do that, it might go over. So I just lower a little bit more. But then, like when I'm like using the threshold and set how much I'm gonna limit the track, it could be anywhere from 1 to 5 dB. But I have to listen to the music and see how much the mix can take. Maybe with less low end can take more dB, and you can still feel like the mix is intact, it's not changing. So the goal is try to be transparent, but limit as much as possible, just to get more level out of it without destroying the mix.
Okay.
I think that's the goal. Some mixes you only can do 1 or 2 dB. That's it. Otherwise, like more than that, you feel like the mix is like falling apart.
I think that I do agree, with Matt. I myself use maximum of 2 dB of limiting. After that, it destroyed the music. So I do everything before that, in order, to not rely on limiters. And I do have the feeling that if you use more than 2-3 dB of gain reduction on the limiter, it's that the mix is wrong. It's not correct. You should have a mix that just need 2 dB of limiting and sound pretty loud. Sound around like -9, -10. Love for electronic music, not for jazz or anything else. But for electronic music, you do want that level because everyone else has it. I know it's kind of a shame, but everyone else has it, and they're not going to lower their tracks. So you need to learn to mix in order to have a pretty efficient, loudness, like still dynamic, but not too low. And for the output, of the limiter, mine is set to -0.2. So I avoid intersample clip. I monitor at all time the intersample clip to make sure there's none, because all of my work's going to go on Spotify, and Spotify hates intersample clip. YouTube's going to distort instantly if there's intersample clip, and iTunes doesn't like it too. When the normalize is on, it's sort of like it's going to lower the track by how many intersample clip there is, and also it's going to look at the loft. It's a bit complex. Maybe it's too much to start here, but more or less, I would just lower my threshold until I see 2 dB of gain reduction, 1.5, 2 dB of gain reduction, and I would stay there. And then I would walk ahead, of the limiter in order to find more loudness with the punchiness, because you do want the punchiness. If it's not punchy in the club, it's going to be lame. You want that kick, to hit very hard. If not, people is not going to dance.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you, guys.
No problem.
Jeff?
I mean, instead of beating a dead horse on the current song, I think we kind of hit that. I guess my question would be more so for future mixes. Where are you working out of?
I have a little room here. It's been meaning to put some acoustic treatment up, but right now it's just drywall.
Okay.
And
I mean, you can make a good mix from any environment with any equipment as long as you understand the shortcomings that you're working with.
Yeah, I think
okay, this room sucks, but I know that it sucks. And where does it suck? And what frequency ranges does it suck? And how do I work with that and play with that? And I think sort of like they're walking you through the things that are on this particular mix, but then I might revisit some other things that you've been working on. Did I have a similar problem? Maybe it's just that, I am really not hearing these frequencies, or I'm hearing certain frequencies way too much and they're not actually there. And then you can actually adjust your room specific. Paul would be the better person to ask about things that you can put up in strategic places. You don't have to float your whole room. You don't have to RLX the whole room.
Yeah.
You got to figure out what specifically is wrong with the environment that you're working in, and then you can do minor little fixes to perk it up. Some fiberglass here, maybe some bass diffusers in a certain spot. Boom! All of a sudden, you can actually hear what you're working on a little bit better, and then a lot of these things go away. I mean, Paul can probably point you to. I think there's a few software things where they can literally just like send a frequency around the room and point out where you have some shortcomings or things that are being accentuated too much. I'll let Paul point you in that direction.
Yeah, there certainly is root correction software out there, and I think you're speaking more specifically about an analyzer, like a TEF or something like that.
Right.
Like headphone also helps. So
what was that?
It's the headphone always help.
Yeah,
it's consistent. So
yeah, headphone. Like people always complain that they can't listen to the mixes in the car. And it's you have to be able to listen to your mix in the car. The same way people will talk a lot of smack about headphones. I mean, I think you certainly can't. Well, you shouldn't be mixing exclusively in headphones, but they are a great.
Yeah, checking low ends especially probably.
So next track, it's Allison Duggan. Is that how you say your last name?
Yes, that is exactly how you say it. Perfect.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your track before I play it?
Sure. So this is a project I worked on with a couple of people from when I was at Queens College. There was an artist who wanted to put out an album. He has a lot of inspiration from The Doors and early 90s grunge. And that's something that piques my interest, since I really want to mix a lot of artists that have that earthy tone to them and also have a lot of rock and roll edge. And this guy, he's got a very limited vocal range, but he was trying his best to reach up there. And yeah, so it was really fun to record this album, and especially with the very high arches in the recording studio that we had. We had to put up a lot of barriers, make sure that everything sounded okay. They used a lot of DI for the guitars. What concerned me, though, was the guitars were recorded, they were doubled when recorded, and that was kind of going against the sound he was trying to get. So when it came to the mixing, he wanted less guitar, and it just became really kind of a muddy situation. And in this track, especially, there was a Rhodes that we used, and were able to use an actual Rhodes, which was really cool. So, but you really can't hear it as much. So I want to see how A, I can widen the sound more, and B, how I can make the guitar, less substantial without it peaking. Each track is set with its own bus with a condenser, but maybe I condense too much in one area and not enough in another. So would love to hear your thoughts, just so I can progress more with this.
Right on. Okay, so here we go.
darkness. I can only see darkness without your light. Darkness, light.
You know, I really like how big the vocal is, but then, you know, some of the other instruments, I kind of want them to be, you know, bigger to match the vocal. And maybe this is getting into, you know, starting to dip into more production than it is mixing. Well, what dips into production more than mixing is I would do a little more pitch correction on the vocal.
Yeah.
And, you know, you had mentioned that the guitars were direct. Are you using any kind of amp sim on the guitars?
Yeah, I used an amp simulation on, because there's a bunch of guitar takes. So like, I think it was just breaking down and finding the right guitars I wanted to take in. So we did record in a DI with an amp simulator.
I would just, you know, some of the sounds just sound a little bit small, and you know, like I love the reverbs and I love the effects that you did. I just maybe want to hear a little bit more bigger, drier sounds on top of those reverbs, so they're not so washy. And as far as like the Rhodes versus the guitars, you know, the Rhodes is pretty bright and kind of sprinkly there. I kind of want to hear more of the other elements like surround that bright sprinkliness. They kind of just feel like they're a little dark and compared to the rest of it, and I feel like that's harmonic content. Again, it goes to maybe, you know, could be a bit of something like you know, not as quite as like guitar amp distortion, but some type of distortion. You know, something along the lines, not necessarily an oral exciter, but you know, maybe even something like a capitator on some of the sounds, and maybe an amp with, you know, something like a bigger cabinet simulator for the guitars, just to make them bigger. The drums are so tiny in the background, and unless that's like really the production direction that you wanted to go, I would maybe make them a little bit fatter. They don't have to be so like in your face. You know, they could still be in the background there, but just you know, kind of quiet in the background, but just bigger sounds. And I think help fill in a lot of that. Some of the panning, there was one really panned left guitar that was too far left for me. I would have pulled that in a little bit. Sometimes what's nice to do, it sounds like that too, when you want to, you know, pan something to one side, is to on the opposite side add a slight delay to it, and it makes it feel a little bit more not so disconnected all the way off to one side. It's like a, you know, it's like a bit of a micro delay stereoizer type effect.
Okay, that sounds good.
I really love the treatment on a lot of those sounds. I really, really like the effects that you're doing. I guess I think the vocal sounds so big on that compared to the rest of the sounds. I just want to hear some of the other sounds get bigger around the vocal.
Gotcha. Understandable. Thank you.
The opening vibes, I thought, were a hair too hot. But I definitely agree on there are moments where he's pretty pitchy in a way that is a little distracting. Whether that's you melodyne the individual notes out, because I don't know if you want an auto-tune might sort of change the vibe of his vocal. The one guitar was too heavily on the left. The groove seemed a little not quite tight. I mean, that's more of a production thing than necessarily the mixing engineer's fault, but I feel like that it could just be tightened up a little bit. Some things were a hair off. And then as far as, to me, what Paul is talking about with the different effects and the vocal being bigger, I just felt like the vocal didn't feel like it existed in the same space as some of the other instruments, and it didn't quite feel like the space was the same. So there wasn't the same amount of reverb on things. I was clearly hearing the vocal a lot more presently than some other things. And if you just blend those a little bit more cohesively.
Gotcha. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just me wanting that vocal to be prominent, and I was fighting with the vocal and guitar. So I think now I have to just go back to guitar and other sounds. So thank you.
Just make them a big. I mean, they sound good. They just need to be, you know, maybe a little bigger and more present.
Yeah.
I felt that that's a very vibey mix, like extremely vibey, and it could be almost, you know, like a finished mix if you guys want to take that direction. And as Jeff said, the drums is kind of pretty small. Maybe it's, to me, it's small enough that it's almost distracting. That it's too small. So I would make the drums slightly more present, you know, to to increase the groove. And then there's a bunch of guitars, like Paul said, that are a bit just not present enough. So I don't know if it's just a matter of volume or finding a way, with distortion to bring slightly more presence to those guitars. But they tend to be, like Jeff said, in like two different space. Like the vocal is right here, right on top of everything in your face. And then, those guitar goes like, well, on the back of the song. So maybe using a more similar reverb on them and like bringing different frequency to like makes those guitar come up a little bit more forward. And I think also there's a not like an issue per se, but the production is massively centered on the mids. There's not a lot of stuff going on the top. There's not a lot of stuff going on very low. And you have this, like 300 to like 800, things fighting a little bit against each other. And that's going to be very hard for you, to deal with, because that's how it's been recorded.
Yeah.
So, I think making those guitar maybe slightly louder, making the drums slightly louder, and trying to maybe carve some of the other sound, so they leave more room to the voice, and the voice doesn't need to be that loud to be that present. I don't know if you understand, Like,
yeah, I think I get what you're saying. So like basically find a place for each instrument in the sound space and then kind of get that volume on the vocals lower and less reverb so that the guitars can take up more of that space, and maybe even the higher ranges can be more present. Yeah.
I think maybe, the roads could be too full. Maybe, you just want to carve. Although I love the sound of each element as each element alone. When they put all together, I feel that the road takes too much space and the vocal takes too much space. So one has to go, pretty much.
Right.
One has to be carved. And I hate to carve a vocal because, people don't know how road sounds, but they do know how vocal sounds. So you want, your vocal to sound the more natural possible. But sometimes, a small carving too can help. But I would definitively go after the roads first. Try, to make more room for the drums, to make more room for the guitar, and to make more room for the voice.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Thank you.
So I listened to the mix. I like the whole vibe that you're getting. I love the vocal effects and processing and the reverb. I think that's like kind of the highlights of the whole song. And the bass was cool. I like the bass sound you're getting. Maybe a tad too loud, but I think it's okay. So, but like from as a mixer, I think you have a tough job here because the production, like all the instruments are kind of playing the same range. So that's, to begin with, is really hard. So they're playing similar notes and range. So the frequency they're fighting. So, and for the guitar and the rolls, I think there's a couple of things you can do. So you can re-amp the rolls or re-amp the guitar just to have a different tone and separation. Because right now, I think the tone, like to begin with, doesn't work. The recording doesn't work. So you will have to change the sound of the instruments before you start digging in mixing. So you try to you re-amp the guitar to make it dirtier or drier, and then have the rolls like a different sound. So you go through a different amp and stuff like that, distortion that really changed the sound. So, but also a second thing is like they're both like kind of in this left and right stereo field, and they're washy. I don't know if the guitar or the vocal reverb kind of covering everything up. So I would like pretty much like either pan the guitar in the middle, have the rolls take the side, or the opposite. I think that's up to you to design like how you want to pan them. First of all, like which one is in mono. You can have the guitar mono with the vocal, that should be fine. Or have the rolls in the middle with the vocal, and then leave the left and right for the guitar.
Okay.
So you kind of have to make that like production decision how you're gonna do that. I'll if I'm like getting this song to mix today, I'll listen to the rough and see what I would change to begin the whole mixing process before I spend 5 hours and then it's like, okay, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
think that's something you should consider at first. And then also, I think the drum, I like how like quiet it is, but I also wouldn't mind bringing it up like louder. But also, like, there's an alternative way to do it is like you can make the drum warmer and darker, because right now the drum is pretty bright and washy, so it's kind of fighting with everything else. Also, I'll have like a more lo-fi, like the old school warmer drum kit. Then it kind of would sit better with the vocal, because the vocal is like bright with a lot of reverb. Maybe have the drum drier and warmer, so the drum sit below the vocal. The one last thing is just like picking on the vocal is like, I think the vocal needs a little bit more de-essing, because the S is kind of distracting for me, and it could be harsh on headphones and earbuds, and it kind of bring up more S's with like all the reverbs you're having on the vocal. So I'll definitely control the high end of the vocal a little bit better, so it doesn't excite all the high frequency in the reverb, vocal reverb. That should leave a little more space for everything else. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And I wasn't necessarily looking at the level of that, but to me, it's not so much about turning the voice down. It's about making the other instruments more present around the voice. Because I think the voice sounded good. I think if you pull it back into those elements, now maybe it's going to sit in there a little bit better. But I do want to hear those other elements get bigger. I do like what Matt said about maybe like a more old school kit, because the snare is just so tiny. And again, maybe this is more production notes than it is mixing notes, but they are things that we can affect as a mixer. As simple as sample replacement or layering a heavier sample underneath that snare to bring it out. And I do like what Alex also said about bringing out maybe some top end, because it would be nice to hear some like sizzle of the cymbals up there that would kind of carry the groove a little bit more. Again, I really liked the approach on a lot of it. I really like the spatialness of it. I really like some of the effects and a lot of the treatment that you did. It's just, again, I keep thinking amp simulations. Like I end up using Guitar Rig because it has a great cabinet, and it has a tendency to make your direct guitar sound much, much bigger. Even if they don't like totally sound that much different, they just gain a lot more height and width and depth of the actual sound, so doesn't sound just quite so much like a direct. All right, folks. Well, that about wraps it up. Unless anybody wants to throw out any general questions before we split.
For actually like putting a track in for you, can we just email you?
Yeah, there's a submission link on the site.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a simple. You can send a link, or you can send a file, and just give us a description of the track. Matt, Alex, Jeff, I really can't thank you guys enough for participating in this. We certainly had a great turnout.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
No problem. And thanks to everybody to the three of you that submitted a track. I think this was a great first mix review workshop. This was very cool. Thank you for everybody for showing up. Stay safe out there and take care. Definitely get on the mailing list so you can be informed about future workshops. And I'll see you all soon.
Paul, quick question.
Yes.
I saw you had my song in the background. I'm not sure if you could give me any tips on it. I just want to say that the biggest thing for me was because I wanted the highs and mids to be the main center of attention, but it eventually became too overwhelming for the low. So I tried compressing the highs a bit with different instruments, but then the bass became too overwhelming, and then I tried to limit everything, and then everything just became super low. So it's been really weird trying to play around and finding that like good balance.
Got it. All right, let's take a listen.
I think it's a similar problem than like some of the other track. I think the low end is not there. There's no like solid low end, so it makes the track feels skinny. So if you listen to a car, you probably don't hear a lot of low end at all. So
Yeah, no.
they kind of doesn't keep that support for the mid range and upper mid range. The synth is a little bit too big. The main saw synth is a little bit too big. So it's more like a gain staging thing. So if you send to a mastering today, it's like you're gonna limit your synth right now than anything else.
Completely.
I think that's the main problem. The drum's a little bit low, the bass a little bit low. You probably have to just like gain staging it better. So the drums and the synth had to sit in the pocket better. So the drums and the bass had to come up, and then with a little bit more low end to support everything. But I think that's the main issue. Once you fix that, your limiter is gonna react better to your mix.
Okay.
What did you mix then on? Like what speakers? Was it on headphones?
So for me, I mostly use headphones and then my computer speakers.
That's kind of, it's interesting. Computer speaker, like multimedia speakers with a subwoofer can work surprisingly well as a reference monitor. That when I was listening to that, it definitely felt like a headphone mix to me. Mainly because everything was so concentrated in sort of the same frequency range, and the low frequencies, like the kick was just almost like non-existent. I want to hear like way more like low frequency punch with that kick, and the kick was just so bright. Like that's something that happens when we're working predominantly in. I mean, it depends on the headphones, of course, but that the first thing I thought was like this was mixed in headphones.
Yeah, but I think you need to have a reference just so you know how big your low end should be on your headphone. I think because like headphone sometimes is deceiving because it has a lot of bass. Right. So you're kind of overdoing it because you feel a lot of bass on the headphone, then you kind of like dial it back.
And then when you do it on the speakers, you don't hear too much.
Yeah, that is too light. So you gotta have reference just to keep your head in place. Like, okay, this is how much low end the headphone should have. So that's gonna help you. I think the headphones is a problem, but you're not referencing out the song. So you're not familiar with how your headphones sound. So I think that's the issues.
Yeah, because for me, when it came to making the kick, usually I like to layer them, like layer maybe 2-3 different kicks, have it punch a little bit more, and then put it in a bus and equalize it and lower it just a little bit. So maybe when doing that, I also just lower the bass as well.
Yeah, but do you check the phase of all the different samples?
Yeah.
Okay. Just make sure you check it because sometimes people layer them and you don't check the phase, and then it's out of phase, and then there's no low end.
The kick was so very bright to me. It felt like it had like almost no lows. You know, it was very kind of what you're gonna. It just didn't really push enough air in the bottom there.
Okay.
Alex, what do you think?
So, with that type of EDM, big room type of sound, I've done half of Subliminal and Tiesto, stuff on spinning and all of that stuff. So I've heard a lot of this, and the main thing that I've heard is what Paul said. There's not enough kick, low end on the kick. The kick itself need so you need to remove one of the 5 kick, or maybe 2 out of the 5, and put one with a lot of low end, a lot of punch. You want that bass also a little cleaner. And there's a trick, with that EDM, it's sidechaining. Everything must be sidechaining. That kick must sidechain everything else. Every time it's there, so it can really push through, and that's what once again make the people dance. But there's another thing is synths, like the main arpeggio synths that there is in the drop must be much wide, like here. It's the bass and the kick here. The snare can be slightly off, but usually it's center. Then some top end. But this synth must be here, and it must come pushing, because this become the groove on the drop between the kick, the bass that is slightly lower, as Matt said previously on another song, and then this huge synth sounds super wide and super full on the low mids on the side, not in the center. You want you want to destroy the low mids on the synth in the center with EDM, because if not, there's no space for the kick to punch through. And you need your snare too, and then you need all the synths to lay in between these big synths and the rest. But there is something else. The limiter settings on that track is killing the dynamic. And you can hear it just before the drops. You hear that big raise, that roll goes like bam, 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 and then the drop comes and it drops. And it should be the opposite. Yeah. That should raise to a much bigger drop, and now the drop, you can hear the limiter kicking on the first kick. It goes like 5 dB less. So I would watch, the limiter settings. I would watch also what caused that, because something is causing that. I assume maybe one of the kick. As Matt said, the kick might be out of phase. Very easily, the kick might be out of phase. That's why Paul hear it so bright, because usually it's what there is left, when it's out of phase. So I would just mute one of the 5 kick at a time until, the kick come up. I'm pretty sure something is out of phase there to create, because the limiter is going to limit when it's out of phase. You're not going to hear it. You're not going to hear the kick, but the limiter is going to react, whether it's in phase or out of phase. And sometimes this is what's going on.
Okay. Yeah, because usually when I limit, I put the threshold a little bit too low than what it should be. So at first, listening to it, it sounds okay, but then I guess maybe I put too much and that lowers it more. Because I did realize that in the drop, it does, instead of getting loud or being more punchy, it does kind of get quieter. So I'll definitely be looking at that. Because it was just like a lot of different elements that I put as well, and different effects. So it's trying to control all of them too. But yeah, I see what you guys mean, and I definitely see where I could have made the issue for that to happen.
If all you have headphones and multimedia speakers, I would. Do your multimedia speakers have a sub? You said computer speakers.
Yeah. No, they don't. Not really.
I mean, you can. This isn't like the best advice, but I think it's good advice. I mean, you can go to a place like Target or Best Buy, and for like $100 get, computer speakers that have a subwoofer, and in a pinch, that can, it's a dirt cheap option for having, something where you can actually hear the low frequencies. And you kind of have to, set the sub to something that's comfortable for you, and then listen to other tracks on it. And then it's a question of, kind of matching those other tracks, using those other tracks as a reference. But if that's all you got, that's like the dirt cheap option to get, 2.1 set up at Best Buy. And if that's all you got, then start there.
But I think like for the drop, I think you should do a proper gain staging. So maybe raise every element, like all the elements, the whole track in the drop. And then you set the limiter on the drop first, because that's your loudest levels of the whole song. So you set your limiter there, and then just set it there, and then the rest should be fine. Then your track will be built from like the intro to the drop, and the limiter only acting on the drop, basically. So you still retain the excitement and everything, and the loudness and everything, instead of the energy drop after the drop, during the drop. So gain staging is always like the key, like how you balance everything, how you push everything to the limiter. I think leveling is like the major thing in mixing still.
Cool. Thank you guys.
No problem.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Awesome. This is really great. This went so beyond my expectations. I cannot thank Alex and Matt enough for participating in this, and for all you guys for sending your tracks. This is very cool.